All right, safety pros, let's be honest. Nobody wants to deal with an OSHA citation, but, they happen. And when they do, knowing what to do after can be the difference between a minor headache and, a full-blown organizational migraine. So today we're going deep, deep into that world of OSHA post-citation procedures.
I like to think of it as our playbook for what happens after that dreaded inspection.
Yeah, like what happens after OSHA leaves. We're going straight to the source for this one. We're using OSHA's own Field Operations Manual, Chapter 7.
Straight from the horse's mouth. So the first thing you gotta know is that a citation, it's not set in stone. It's not guilty until proven innocent kind of thing.
Wait, really? So it's not like game over just because they hand you a paper?
Nope. You've got options. You can contest it, the penalties they propose, even the timelines for fixing stuff.
So we've got some wiggle room.
You do, but here's the thing. You've only got 15 working days to file a formal notice of contest.
15 working days.
15.
Yeah.
Miss that deadline and, well, you're stuck with whatever OSHA decided.
Okay, so 15 working days. What if we just miss that deadline? What are the consequences?
It becomes a final order. It's enforceable by law at that point. Basically, whatever OSHA said, that's it. And this is where a lot of companies make mistakes. They think, oh, we'll just talk to OSHA, work it out informally.
Yeah, just like smooth things over.
Right, but that 15-day clock, it doesn't stop, even if you're talking to them.
Oh, so we still have to file that formal notice, even if we're trying to be, like, all friendly?
Exactly. It's like, when you're filing an appeal, even if you're hoping to settle out of court, you still got to file.
Gotcha. So it's all about protecting our right to, disagree later if we need to.
Right. Now, that notice of contest, it's got to be specific. You can't just, write, I disagree on a piece of paper.
Oh, okay. So we can't just object. We got to say what we're objecting to.
Exactly. It needs to say exactly what you're contesting, the penalty amount, specific things on the citation, the deadlines, any combo of those.
Okay. So, no vague objections allowed. What happens if we do contest? Does it become like a courtroom drama?
Not quite a courtroom, but it does get more serious. The case goes to the OSHA Review Commission, which is independent, and they give it to an administrative law judge.
Okay, so we've got a judge involved now.
Yeah, and they'll hold a hearing.
That sounds a lot more official.
It is, and usually at this point, OSHA stops investigating. Anything more, you'll probably need a lawyer.
Got it. So hitting that contest button is a big deal. Now, before we go full-on legal battle, is there any way to, work things out more casually, without lawyers and judges?
Yeah, you can ask for an informal conference. It's basically a chance to sit down with OSHA, maybe have some employees there too, even their reps, and try to, hash things out.
It's like a let's all talk and see if we can agree type of meeting.
Exactly. You ask questions, get some clarification, maybe even propose some solutions, and sometimes you can actually just solve the whole citation right there.
That sounds way better than a hearing. But doesn't that meeting, pause that 15-day clock we were talking about?
It doesn't know.
Did
That's
I?
why filing that notice on time is so important. Even if you're hoping to work things out informally, you don't want to lose the option of challenging it later.
Makes sense. Okay, let's talk about actually fixing the stuff OSHA cited. What if we need more time? What if the fix is super complicated, or we need to, order special equipment or something?
You can file something called a petition for modification of abatement. We call it a PMA.
PMA. Okay, what's a PMA?
It's basically like asking for more time on a project.
So it's we're working on it, but need a little longer card.
Yeah, but you got to have a good reason. OSHA's not just going to give everyone an extension.
Right, so we can't just say we're busy.
Nope. You got to show that you're really trying to comply, and that there's a legit reason why you need extra time. Think supply chain issues, waiting on a special contractor, stuff like that.
But there's a deadline for the PMA too.
You bet. Next working day after the original abatement date. And if you're late, you better have a really good reason, because OSHA's not going to be happy.
So no procrastinating. Okay, so we fixed the stuff, either on time or with an extension. How does OSHA know we actually did it? Do they just take our word for it?
They require what's called verification. You basically got to prove the hazards are gone.
Prove it.
Yeah. And it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. They might want photos, receipts for repairs, reports from safety people, training records, anything that really shows the issue is fixed. It all depends on the violation.
So it's like, show me, don't tell me when it comes to abatement.
Right. Now, there is one exception if the inspector actually sees you fix it during the inspection.
So like right then and there.
Yep. Then they might not need more verification.
So quick action has its rewards. Now, what about equipment? Like if a piece of equipment has a violation on it, do we just like put a do not use sign on it?
It's a bit more formal than that. OSHA wants you to tag any movable equipment with a violation.
Okay, so not just any equipment.
Right. Think tools, machinery, anything that you might move between work sites.
Got it. So like if we've got a faulty forklift.
Exactly, got to tag it.
And when do we tag it? Like right away?
It depends. For handheld stuff, like a drill or grinder, you tag it immediately.
So handheld gets tagged right away. No exceptions.
Right. For bigger stuff, anything that's not handheld, you got to tag it before it moves to a different work site.
Okay, so no sneaking that faulty forklift off to another site. How does OSHA even know if we've tagged things properly, though? Are they like sending spies?
Well, not quite spies, but to actually write you up for a tagging issue, they have to see it themselves. The CSHO, that's the OSHA inspector, has to actually observe the missing tag.
Oh, so they can't just assume we messed up?
You got to have the evidence.
Okay, this is a lot to take in. Contesting, special notices, informal meetings, extensions, proving we fix things, tagging equipment. Phew.
It's a lot, but knowing it all is super important.
Right. Like if you know the rules of the game, you can play it better.
Exactly.
Speaking of knowing the rules, can we talk about what happens after that 15-day deadline passes? Like what are the different stages and when does the citation actually become set in stone?
Yeah, let's talk about final order dates. That's when it becomes official, legally binding. No more arguing.
Okay, so no more wiggle room after that date.
Right. If you don't contest, that date is usually 15 working days after you got the citation. But if you do contest, it gets pushed back.
Oh, so contesting buys us some time. How much time are we talking here?
Depends. Could be 30 days after a judge's decision. Could be even longer if there are appeals.
Okay, so that timeline gets a lot more flexible if we go the contest route. And those final order dates, those are connected to the fixing things part too, right? The abatement?
Absolutely. The deadline for fixing that hazard, that abatement date, can change a lot depending on if you contest and if there are any agreements or changes made.
So it's not always just what's written on that first citation?
Right. If it's uncontested, it's usually what's on there. But you could get an extension if you get that PMA we talked about, or if OSHA changes the citation, or you guys come to an agreement.
Okay, so lots of possibilities there. What about if it is contested? How does that affect the date?
Then usually the final order from the review commission sets the date, that independent body we talked about. But here's the thing. Even if you're fighting some parts of the citation, the stuff you don't contest, you still got to fix those by the original deadline, and you still got to pay those penalties.
So you got to pick your battles, but still follow the rules. Got it. Now, we talked about abatement plans before. When are those necessary? Do we need one for every single violation?
Not for everyone. Usually it's for those really complicated violations, the ones that take a long time to fix. We're talking like 91 days or more.
Okay, so not just like a quick fix, but something more involved.
Right. But the OSHA area director, they can also ask for a plan whenever they feel like it's necessary.
So they have some discretion there. So an abatement plan, it's like showing OSHA how we're going to fix these more complicated problems.
Right. It lays out how you're going to fix it, the timeline, and how you're going to keep everyone safe while you're doing it.
So it's about more than just fixing it. It's about fixing it safely. Makes sense. Now, what if we totally mess up the paperwork? Like we forget to send in the proof that we fixed things. Is there a penalty for that?
There can be, yes. Usually if you don't send in that verification on time, OSHA will start with a reminder, maybe a phone call and a letter.
Okay, so they try to work with us a little bit.
Yeah, they'll usually give you another 7 days to send in whatever's missing. But if you still don't send it, they can write you up for failure to certify.
So a whole new citation. Ouch. Seems like a lot for just missing some paperwork.
It is, and it just shows how important it is to be organized and meet those deadlines. If you don't, OSHA might consider that a violation in itself.
Okay, message received. Stay organized. Now, what about those special situations you mentioned? Like construction, what makes those tricky?
Construction is tricky because it's always changing, right? So by the time it comes to verify abatement, the site might look totally different.
Yeah, makes sense.
A building that was under construction when they gave you the citation might be done by the time the verification is due. Or a hazard might be gone because that phase of work is finished.
So what happens then?
If OSHA can verify that the site's closed or the hazard's gone, they might accept that as abatement. No extra certification needed.
Oh, so they're reasonable in those situations.
Yeah, they are. But remember, this doesn't apply to every construction citation. If it's about equipment or your overall safety program, you'll still need to certify even if the site's closed.
Okay, so it depends on the violation. What about those field sanitation and temporary labor camps?
Those are interesting because usually another agency, the Employment and Training Administration, or ETA, does those inspections. But even though it's not OSHA doing the inspecting, you still got to follow OSHA's rules for proving you fixed stuff.
Wait, really? So even though it's a different agency, we still answer to OSHA?
Yep. If ETA finds problems with your verification, they'll tell OSHA, and then OSHA can come in and write you up.
Oh, wow. So it's like a team effort. Okay, so no matter who inspects, we're ultimately responsible for proving we fix things according to OSHA's rules.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important part of the process, those follow-up inspections. You know, after they give you the citation.
Right. So OSHA doesn't just trust us. They actually come back to check.
They do. The main goal is to make sure you've really fixed the things they cited. They want to see it for themselves.
Okay. So it's about accountability, making sure we're actually doing what we said we would do.
Right. And there are different types of follow-up inspections. The first one, it's called the initial follow-up. How are it all right?
Yeah. Very straightforward. So what happens if they do this initial follow-up and something's not fixed? What are the consequences?
I'll probably give you a notification of failure to abate alleged violation.
Okay, so a formal, you didn't do what you said you would do, notice.
Pretty much, yeah. And it usually comes with more penalties. For every day, the violation keeps going.
Oh, so it's not just a one-time penalty. It keeps adding up.
It can, yep. And if they do a second follow-up and things still aren't fixed, those penalties can get even bigger. It can get really expensive.
So we got to be on top of those deadlines and make sure we're really fixing those hazards.
Definitely. Now, sometimes those regular penalties aren't enough. Sometimes there's what we call flagrant disregard.
Flagrant disregard. What does that mean?
It's when a company just totally blows off the citation or keeps doing the same violation over and over. In those cases, OSHA can get really serious. They might even take the company to court.
Wow, so they're not messing around when it comes to worker safety.
They're not. Worker safety is the priority, and it's their job to make sure companies are taking it seriously.
Okay, makes sense. So those follow-ups, they're all about making sure things are fixed.
Right. But like we talked about before, sometimes abatement takes a while, like those big complex projects. Are there special procedures for those longer-term situations?
There are, yeah.
Yeah.
When you're looking at a long time to fix something, OSHA might do something called a monitoring inspection.
Monitoring inspection. So like they check in on us to see how we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. It's to make sure you're making progress, you're meeting your deadlines, and keeping everyone safe while you're fixing things.
So it's like a check-in to make sure we're on track. When do these monitoring inspections usually happen?
Well, if you got a PMA, remember that extension. They'll want to make sure you're using that time wisely and actually working on the problem.
So it's not just an excuse to delay things.
Right. And if the citation has dates that are more than a year out, they'll usually check in every 6 months or so until it's fixed.
Makes sense. And you mentioned corporate-wide settlement agreements. What are those? Those are when a company has multiple locations or has the same violation at different sites, and they reach an agreement with OSHA to fix things across the board. Part of that agreement often includes these monitoring inspections to make sure the improvements are happening everywhere.
Oh, so it's about making sure the whole company is improving, not just one location.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of safety that reaches every part of the organization.
Okay, so monitoring inspections, they're all about checking progress and making sure things are moving in the right direction. Now, can we go back to those notifications of failure to abate for a second? You said they come with extra penalties, but how do they calculate those? What are the factors?
It's not just a random number. For serious or other than serious violations, it's a formula. They look at how bad the violation was and how many days it's been since the deadline.
Oh, so the longer we wait, the more it costs us.
Yep, it's like a ticking clock. And remember, for willful violations, those are the really bad ones where the employer knew about the problem and didn't fix it. The penalties can be a lot higher.
Makes sense. They really want to drive home the point that safety matters.
They do. Okay, so we talked about follow-up inspections, those monitoring inspections. What about those situations where traditional enforcement isn't enough? You mentioned something about flagrant disregard earlier.
Right.
If a company just completely ignores the citation, or if they have a history of violations, OSHA can take stronger action. They might even take the company to court. That's where those big flagrant disregard penalties come in.
Okay, so they have some serious tools in their toolbox when they need them.
They do. It's all about making sure workplaces are safe.
All right, so we've covered a lot about what happens after a citation, but what about before? What can companies do to avoid getting those citations in the first place?
That's a great question, and it really gets to the heart of what we do as safety professionals. The best way to deal with a citation is to never get one right.
Couldn't agree more.
And the foundation for that is building a strong safety culture within your organization.
Okay, let's talk about that. Safety culture. What does that even mean, and how do we make it happen?
It starts with leadership. They have to show that they truly care about safety, not just say it. They need to be involved, walk the walk, be a part of the solution.
So, lead by example. Actions speak louder than words.
Exactly. Employees can tell when someone's not being genuine.
Okay, leadership is key. What else is important?
Communication. Make sure your employees feel like they can speak up about safety concerns, report hazards, and know that they'll be heard.
So it's about creating an environment where everyone feels comfortable talking about safety.
Yes, and they know that their concerns will be taken seriously.
Okay, leadership and communication. What else?
Training, of course. Make sure your employees are trained on all the safety procedures that are relevant to their jobs. The training needs to be good, engaging, and something they'll actually remember.
Right, so we're talking about giving them the knowledge they need to work safely.
Exactly. And we need to hold everyone accountable from the top down. If people aren't following the rules, there have to be consequences. That shows that we're serious about safety.
So it's about creating a culture where safety is part of everything we do, not just an afterthought.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process, something we always have to be working on.
Okay, so we've laid a good foundation here, understanding OSHA's post-citation procedures and the importance of a strong safety culture. Now let's get even more specific. Can you walk us through an example of how this might all play out in the real world?
Sure. Let's say you're the safety manager at a manufacturing plant. OSHA comes in for an inspection and finds a couple of serious violations. They issue a citation with some hefty fines and give you a deadline to fix things.
Okay, so now what? We're probably feeling a bit panicked.
First, take a deep breath. Read that citation carefully. Understand exactly what they're saying. What did they find? How much are the fines? When do we have to fix it by?
So we're gathering information and getting a clear picture of the situation.
Exactly. Once you know what you're dealing with, you got to make some choices. Do you contest the citation? Do you try to negotiate? Or do you just accept it and focus on fixing things?
Okay, so we have options. Let's go through each one. First, let's talk about accepting the citation and complying. What does that look like?
If you accept it, you got to focus on fixing those violations by the deadline and paying those fines.
Okay, so we're prioritizing action and getting those hazards taken care of.
Right. You got to document everything you do, every step you take, and then send that proof to OSHA by their deadline. Remember those different types of verification we talked about?
Right, like photos, reports, training records, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And even though you're not contesting, it's still okay to talk to OSHA. If you have questions, ask them.
So even in a we agree situation, communication is still key.
Always. Now, what about if we decide to contest the citation? What happens then? Contesting can be a good move, especially if you think OSHA got it wrong, the fines are too high, or the deadline is unreasonable.
So it's about standing up for what we believe is right and making sure we're being treated fairly.
Yeah, but remember that 15-day deadline. You got to file that notice of contest quickly. And it can't just say we disagree. You got to be specific about what you're contesting and why.
Okay, so we have to be organized, clear, and quick. What happens after we file that notice of contest?
The case goes to a judge, and there will be a hearing. You'll get to present your side of the story, challenge OSHA's findings, and try to get a better outcome.
Okay, so it's our chance to make our case.
Right. And at this stage, things can get complicated, so it's usually a good idea to involve a lawyer.
Makes sense. Lawyers know the law. But even if we're contesting, are there still ways to try and work things out informally?
Definitely. Remember those informal conferences? Those can happen during the contest process, too. It's a chance to maybe reach a settlement or at least narrow down what you disagree on.
So even if we're headed to a hearing, it's still worth talking.
Always. It could save everyone a lot of time and money.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's talk about needing more time. We talked about PMAs before, those petitions for modification of abatement. Can you break that down a bit more?
Sure. A PMA is basically a request for an extension. But you can't just say, we need more time. You got to have a really good reason.
So we can't just be lazy and ask for an extension.
Nope. You got to show that you're making a good faith effort to comply and that the delay is caused by something you can't control.
Okay, so things like waiting for parts or a specialized contractor.
Right. And there's a deadline for submitting the PMA too. It's the next business day after the original deadline.
Okay, so no dragging our feet. So let's say OSHA grants us the extension. What happens then?
Well, you use it extra time to fix the violations. But even with an extension, you got to keep OSHA in the loop. They might require regular updates on your progress, especially if it's a big project.
Okay, so it's about transparency and communication, even when we're given more time.
Exactly. Now, like, say you fix the violations. How do you prove it to OSHA? You have to provide what's called abatement verification. Basically, it's proof that the hazards are gone.
Proof, like what?
Depends on the violation, but it could be photos, receipts, reports, anything that shows you've fixed the problem.
Okay, so we got to be able to back up our claims with evidence.
Exactly. And it has to be submitted on time. Missing those deadlines can lead to more trouble.
So organization and time management are key.
They are.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. It's clear that there's a lot to consider when dealing with OSHA citations.
There is. But knowing the process and your options can make a big difference. It can help you avoid costly mistakes and keep your workplace safer.
And that's what it's all about, right? Keeping our workers safe.
Absolutely. It really is. It's like weighing your options, seeing what's going to work best for your specific situation.
They've got to be strategic about it.
Right. And speaking of strategy, let's dig into that verification process a bit more. You've done the work, fixed the hazards, met the deadlines, you're feeling good, but how do you actually prove to OSHA that you did what you said you'd do?
Right. We can't just tell them, trust us, it's fixed.
Nope. Got to show them the receipts.
Exactly.
And that's where those different levels of abatement verification come in. Remember, it all depends on what the violation was, what OSHA needs to see.
Right. We talked about certification, documentation, plans, progress reports, all that stuff. Can you break those down a little more for us?
Sure. So abatement certification, that's like the most basic level. Basically, a written statement from you, the employer, saying, yep, we fixed all the things on the citation.
Okay. So basically just confirming we did what we said we'd do.
Yeah. But here's the thing. For some violations, that's not enough. For the more serious ones like willful or repeat violations or, if OSHA thinks it's necessary, you got to provide more than just a statement. You got to give them documentation.
Okay, so what kind of documentation are we talking about?
Think proof, hard proof. Photos, videos showing that the hazard's gone. Maybe receipts for repairs or new equipment, reports from, safety professionals who checked it out, training records for the employees involved. Whatever really proves the issue is fixed.
Okay, so it's like, show me the work, basically.
Yeah. And what they need to see depends on the violation. But the main thing is you got to be thorough, make sure you can back up what you're saying.
Yeah. Makes sense. Now, what about those plans and progress reports? When do those come into play?
Those are usually for when the fix is more complicated or it takes a while to do.
Yeah.
Like if you're putting in a whole new safety program or making big changes to your building or equipment, OSHA might want to see a plan, a step-by-step, how you're going to get it done and on what timeline.
So like a roadmap for fixing the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And those progress reports, those keep OSHA updated on how things are going. You might have to send those in regularly. It depends on the violation and what OSHA wants.
Okay, makes sense. So we've covered the types of verification, but what if we drop the ball, miss a deadline, or send in incomplete stuff? What happens then?
Well, like we talked about before, if you don't do that verification right or if you're late, OSHA can actually consider that a whole other violation, like you're not taking it seriously, which can mean more citations and more fines.
So we really got to treat those verification deadlines like they're just as important as the abatement deadlines.
Exactly. Don't mess around with that paperwork. It's important. Now, let's move on to another big part of this, follow-up inspections. After they issue the citation.
Right. OSHA comes back and checks on us, like we talked about. What should we expect during one of these follow-up inspections?
Well, they're mostly focused on the stuff from the original citation. The inspector, the CSHO, will probably want to see the actual changes you made, the physical stuff. They'll look at the documentation you sent in. They might even talk to some employees to make sure the hazards are really gone.
Okay, so it's not just a quick glance. They're really checking things out.
Yeah, they want to see that you've actually made the workplace safer, not just tried to cover things up.
And you mentioned different types of follow-ups, right? What are those again?
Right. So the first one is the initial follow-up. Pretty straightforward name.
Yeah, to the point. When does that usually happen?
Usually a few weeks or months after the first inspection. It's just to confirm that you've taken care of those initial problems.
Okay, so like a first check-in. What about those longer fixes, the ones that take more time?
For those, they might do monitoring inspections. Those are to keep an eye on those bigger projects, make sure you're on track.
So it's like they're checking our homework.
Kind of, yeah. And these monitoring inspections, they usually happen every 6 months or so until the problem is completely fixed.
Okay. What are some things that might make OSHA decide to do one of these monitoring inspections?
Well, if you got a PMA, that extension, they'll probably want to check in and make sure you're using that time well. Also, for violations with deadlines that are more than a year out, those usually get monitored. And sometimes it's part of a bigger agreement, like those corporate-wide settlements we talked about.
Right. So the takeaway is OSHA is going to be keeping tabs on us, especially for the bigger, more complicated issues.
They are. Now, what happens if, even after all of this, we don't fix the problems by the deadline?
Yeah, what are the consequences if we just, totally fail to abate?
Well, if they do a follow-up and the violations are still there, you'll probably get that notification of failure to abate we talked about.
Right, that's the formal, you didn't do what you were supposed to do notice.
Yep. And usually you get hit with more penalties, and those penalties can keep adding up for every day you're late.
Ouch. So those costs can really start to pile up.
They can, and if they do a second follow-up and it's still not fixed, the penalties get even worse.
So we really got to make sure we're taking those deadlines seriously and actually fixing those hazards.
Absolutely. And remember, sometimes it goes beyond those regular penalties. If OSHA thinks a company is deliberately ignoring safety or has a pattern of violations, they can bring out the big guns. They can even take the company to court.
Okay, so they have options, and they're not afraid to use them.
Right. It's all about making sure workplaces are safe.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about what happens after a citation, but what about before? What can companies do to prevent those citations from happening in the first place?
That's a great question, and it really gets to the heart of what we do as safety professionals. The best way to handle an OSHA citation is to never get one, right?
100% agree.
And the foundation for that is building a strong safety culture within your organization. We touched on this before, but it's worth emphasizing again.
Okay, let's dive back into safety culture. What are some things companies can actually do to make that happen?
First, you got to have leadership that really gets it, that truly cares about safety. It can't just be something they say, they got to live it. Be involved, walk the walk, be a part of finding and fixing hazards.
Lead by example, right?
Exactly. Employees can see right through it if it's not genuine.
Okay, leadership is key. What else is important?
Open communication. Make sure employees feel comfortable speaking up about safety concerns, reporting near misses, anything that makes them feel unsafe. They got to know they'll be heard and that their concerns will be taken seriously.
So it's a two-way street, not just the boss telling everyone what to do.
Exactly. Give employees a voice, make them part of the solution.
Okay, leadership and communication. What else should be on our safety culture checklist?
Training, of course. Make sure everyone gets thorough training on the safety procedures for their jobs. And the training can't be boring. It's got to be engaging, relevant, something they'll actually remember and use.
Right. Give them the knowledge and skills to work safely. What about the workplace itself? Are there things we can do to make it physically safer?
Absolutely. Regular inspections are key. Don't wait for OSHA to find your hazards. Find them yourself first. Walk through your facility, check your equipment, be proactive.
So be our own safety inspectors.
Exactly. And get your employees involved too. They're the ones working there every day. They often see things that others might miss.
Great point. So we've got leadership, communication, training, and regular inspections. Anything else to add to the safety culture recipe?
Don't forget to recognize people. When someone goes above and beyond for safety, let them know you appreciate it. A simple thank you, a shout out in a meeting, even a small gift card.
So show them that we value their efforts.
Yes. Positive reinforcement goes a long way. It assures people that safety is truly important to the company.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of good information here. It's clear that creating a strong safety culture is so important for preventing OSHA citations and, more importantly, keeping our workers safe.
I agree. It's all about creating a workplace where everyone feels valued, respected, and safe.
Well said. Now let's switch gears for a minute and talk about something that's closely related to post-citation procedures, but often overlooked. Record keeping.
Great point. Record keeping, it's a big one. And it's not just about making OSHA happy. It's about having a clear picture of how you're doing on safety, seeing trends, and using that information to make things even better.
Okay, so let's talk records. What kind of stuff should companies be keeping track of, and why is it so important?
First things first, you got to keep good records of any time OSHA's been involved. Inspections, citations, abatement actions. Keep copies of everything, the citations themselves, any letters you send back and forth, proof of how you fix things, settlement agreements, everything.
So like a big file for every interaction with OSHA.
Exactly. You want to be able to look back and see exactly what happened, what you did, and what the result was.
Okay, that makes sense. What other kinds of records are important?
Training records. You got to keep track of who's been trained, on what topics, when, and any certifications they got.
So who's trained on what, when, and how?
Exactly. That's important if, God forbid someone gets hurt. You can show that they were properly trained on the hazards of their job.
Right. It's all about being able to show that you did your due diligence. Okay, what about when someone does get hurt? What records do we need to keep for injuries and illnesses?
OSHA's got very specific rules about this. You have to log every injury and illness that's considered recordable. They have forms for this, the OSHA 300 log and some others.
Okay, so there's a system for it. What are some common mistakes you see companies make with record keeping?
One of the biggest ones is under-recording injuries and illnesses. Some companies, they try to make their safety record look better by not recording everything, stuff they think is minor or not really work-related.
So they're trying to hide stuff.
Basically, yeah. But that can really backfire. If OSHA finds out you're doing that, the penalties can be huge and it just makes you look bad.
Right. Honesty is the best policy. It's better to be upfront than try to hide things and get caught later.
Definitely. Integrity is important, especially when it comes to safety.
Okay, so we've talked about keeping records of OSHA stuff, training, and injuries and illnesses. Any other record-keeping tips?
Don't forget to document all the good stuff you're doing. Keep records of your safety inspections, hazard assessments, any near-miss reports, your safety meetings, and what you did to fix things. All of it.
So show that we're not just reacting to problems, we're actively trying to prevent them.
Exactly. Good record keeping, it tells the story of your safety program. It shows that you're always trying to improve and that you're committed to creating a safe workplace.
Okay, so record keeping is about way more than just paperwork. It's about building a culture of accountability and transparency.
Well said.
Okay, we've covered a lot about record keeping. Now, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, the potential for lawsuits. We've talked a lot about OSHA. But what about the legal risks for companies that don't follow the rules?
That's a really important point. If you don't comply with OSHA, you could be opening yourself up to some serious legal trouble.
So we're not just talking about OSHA fines, we're talking about getting sued.
Exactly. If an employee gets hurt because of an unsafe workplace, they can sue. And if you broke OSHA rules, that makes their case even stronger.
So an OSHA citation could be used against us in court.
It could, yeah. And it's not just OSHA. There are other laws too, like workers' comp laws and negligence laws.
Okay, so there are a lot of legal things to consider when it comes to safety.
There are. And remember, it's not just about money. Getting sued can really hurt your company's reputation and make it hard to find good employees.
So safety is about more than just avoiding fines. It's about protecting our employees, our company, and our reputation.
Absolutely.
And that brings us back to safety culture. When safety is truly valued, it benefits everyone.
I couldn't agree more. When you create a workplace where everyone feels safe and respected, everyone wins.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. Post-citation procedures, safety culture, record keeping, legal risks, a lot of important stuff.
It's been a great discussion. I hope our listeners are feeling more informed and ready to tackle these challenges.
And remember, you're not alone. There are resources out there, like Safety One Source, that can help you build a strong safety program and create a truly safe workplace.
Now, let's switch gears for a second and talk about something that's really important when it comes to OSHA citations. Understanding the different types of violations and what they mean for you.
Okay, let's break that down. We've been throwing around terms like serious, willful, repeat. What's the difference between these and how do they affect the penalties and all that?
Great question. Knowing the different types of violations is key to figuring out how serious the situation is and how to respond. Let's start with the most common type, other than serious violations.
Okay, other than serious, what does that even mean?
It means the violation is unlikely to cause a major injury or death. It might still be a hazard, but the risk is pretty low.
So like what? Missing paperwork, like a lot of clutter?
Yeah, things like that. unguarded equipment where the chance of getting hurt is really small, stuff like that. These violations shouldn't be ignored, but they're not as serious as some others.
Okay, so what kind of fines do we get for those?
The most they can fine you for an other than serious violation is $14,502 per violation. But usually OSHA will reduce that depending on things like the size of your company, how hard you're trying to comply, and if you have any past violations.
So the actual fine could be less than that maximum.
Right. It all depends. Now, let's move on to a more serious type. Serious violation.
Serious violations, those sound more intense.
They are. These are violations where there's a good chance someone could die or get seriously hurt, and the employer knew or should have known about the hazard.
So we're talking about hazards that are a real danger to workers, and the company either knew about it or should have known about it if they were paying attention.
Exactly. Some examples of serious violations might be like no fall protection for people working at heights, unguarded machinery, exposed electrical wires, no respirators where there are dangerous chemicals.
Right, yeah. Those are definitely situations where someone could get seriously hurt or worse. What are the fines like for those?
The fines for serious violations are a lot higher. Right now, the maximum is $14,502 per violation, same as other than serious, but they're less likely to reduce the fine for these.
So OSHA is taking these serious violations very seriously.
They are. Now let's talk about the most serious type, willful violations.
Willful violations. Okay, those sound bad.
They are bad. These are when the employer knows about the OSHA rule and chooses not to follow it, or if they just don't care about safety at all.
So it's not just a mistake or an oversight, it's intentional.
Right. OSHA has to prove that the company knew the rule, decided not to follow it, and knew that they were putting their employees at risk.
Okay, so OSHA has to really build a case to prove a willful violation.
They do, and the penalties are really serious, ranging from $10,548 to $145,027 per violation.
Per violation. That could bankrupt a company.
It could, and in some cases, the company or the people in charge could even face criminal charges.
Wow. Okay, so willful violations are in a whole different category. Are there any other types we should know about?
A few more. There are repeat violations. That's when OSHA finds the same problem, or a similar one, at your workplace multiple times.
So if we don't learn our lesson, the penalties get worse.
Exactly. It shows that you're not taking safety seriously. The fines for repeat violations can go up to $145,027 per violation.
Okay, so we got to fix problems and make sure they don't happen again. What else?
Failure to abate violations, that's when you don't fix a violation by the deadline.
Right, we talked about those, the notification of failure to abate thing.
Yep, and those can lead to extra fines for every day you're late.
Okay. Any other categories?
One more. De minimis violations.
De minimis, what's that?
Those are violations that don't really affect safety or health. It's like you didn't cross your T's or dot your I's. Technically, it's a violation, but it doesn't put anyone in danger.
So like a paperwork error?
Yeah, or maybe a ladder is missing a sticker, but it's perfectly safe to use. Stuff like that. Usually OSHA won't even write you up for these, and there's no fine. They might just point it out to you.
Okay, so it's good to know that OSHA isn't out to get us for every little thing.
Right. But even though there's no fine, it's still good to fix those de minimis violations. It shows that you care about safety.
Makes sense. Now, I want to go back to something you said earlier about knowing your rights during an OSHA inspection.
Yeah, that's super important. Knowing your rights can make the whole process a lot smoother and make sure you're treated fairly.
Okay, so what are our rights? What do we need to know if OSHA shows up?
First, you can ask to see their credentials. Make sure they're really from OSHA and that they have a warrant if it's not a planned inspection.
Okay, so don't just let anyone waltz in and start snooping around.
Right. And if they don't have a warrant, you can tell them to come back when they do. But keep in mind, that could make things more difficult later on. It's usually best to cooperate while still knowing your rights. It's like you're being careful, but you're not being, difficult.
Right, finding that balance. So what other rights do we have during an inspection?
Well, you have the right to go with the inspector when they're walking through your facility.
Oh, so we can be there with them.
Yep, you can see what they're looking at, hear what they're saying, and, answer their questions or address concerns right then and there.
Okay, so we can be a part of that process.
Exactly. You don't have to agree with everything they say, but at least you're there to give your side of the story and maybe clear up any confusion.
Makes sense. What about taking pictures or videos during the inspection? Is that allowed?
You can, yeah, as long as it doesn't get in the way of the inspection or create any safety hazards.
So it's good to document things ourselves, just in case.
Yeah, it's good to have your own record of what the inspector saw. Sometimes, perspectives can differ.
Right, right. What about employee interviews? Can OSHA talk to our employees during the inspection?
They can, yeah, and they can do it privately too. You can have a company representative there, but the employee also has the right to talk to the inspector alone if they want to.
Okay, so we have to respect that.
Absolutely, and you can have your lawyer there too at any point during the inspection.
Oh, so we can bring our lawyer to the opening conference, the walkthrough, the closing conference.
Yep, anytime. You're right. And it's often a good idea, especially if it's a complicated inspection or the stakes are high.
Okay, so we've talked about credentials, being present during the walkthrough, taking pictures, and legal representation. Any other important rights employers should know about?
One more big one. You have the right to contest any citations or penalties that OSHA gives you. We talked about the contest process before, but it's important to remember that you don't just have to accept what they say. You can fight back if you think it's wrong.
Right, that 15-day window to file the notice of contest.
Exactly. Knowing your rights and using them can make a big difference in how things turn out.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. From what to do when OSHA shows up to all those post-citation procedures to building a strong safety culture. It's a lot to take in.
It is, but I think our listeners are walking away with a lot of valuable information.
I hope so. And remember, everyone, you're not alone in this. There are resources like Safety One Source that can help you every step of the way.
Safety One Source, they're the experts. They can help you build a solid safety program and create a workplace where everyone is safe and healthy.
Exactly. So if you need help, reach out to them. And to all our listeners, thanks for tuning in to this deep dive. Stay safe out there, everyone.